Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to share my final wrap-up of 2023. I'm going to talk about all the books I read in December to close out the year. Before we get into that, I just want to say that the Best Books of 2023 video is in the works. Please be patient with me because there's always a lot of work and forethought that goes into making that video. Either way, I never post it before the year actually ends, and I never post it before my last wrap-up. That's just how my brain works. I'm also soft launching the fact that I'm starting a new job sometime this month. I'm not sure when because there's still some things to finalize. It's a really big change, but also a very exciting and welcome change. That said, as I ease into it, I'm gonna have to figure out my new flow and schedule when it comes to working, filming, editing, posting, all of that stuff. So please give me some grace with that because I will definitely need it. But that's enough chit chat. Let's talk about the books. The first 4 books I read in December were for the Queer Lit Readathon. I've actually already reviewed all of them very thoroughly in my Queer Lit Readathon wrap-up, which I will link down below. You can check that out if you want to hear my thoughts on OkCupid by Mason Deaver, The Borrow a Boyfriend Club by Paige Powers, North Ranger by Ray Tercero and Brie Indigo, and You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. The next book I finished after the Queer Lit Readathon was, surprise, surprise, yet another queer book, and that was my Arc of the Prospects by Katie Hoffman, which comes out on April 9th from the Dial Press. This is a queer adult sports romance about Gene, who's the first openly gay trans man in the history of professional baseball. He's not in the major leagues, but he does play for a minor league team called the Beaverton Beavers as their shortstop, where he's kind of made a name for himself. But his world is turned upside down when his former teammate and biggest rival, Luis Estrada, is traded to the Beavers, not only jeopardizing Gene's spot in the lineup, but also putting the loyalty of Gene's heart to the test. According to the publisher, this is the first adult rom-com about a gay trans man written by a gay trans man to be published by a Big 5 publisher, which is huge. And it's also worth noting that besides being a gay trans man, Gene has ADHD and anxiety, and Luis is a gay Mexican man with nerve damage who experiences panic attacks. Content warnings for references to car crash-related injuries and recovery, references to experienced transphobia, some depictions of panic attacks, some descriptions of sports-related injuries, and some explicit sexual content. The pure, unadulterated joy that this story brings me is entirely beyond description and also cannot be overstated. I think aside from We Could Be So Good, The Prospects is one of the top books in 2023 that specifically brought me the most happiness. Not only is this story fun and chaotic, but for me it's so incredibly healing to read, as all trans romances are, because when I get to see trans masc characters being loved for exactly who they are and as they are, that's an incredibly powerful thing. But before I get lost in that, I do want to talk about the sports piece of this story because it's done so incredibly well and I loved it so much. Baseball is a huge part of my life and my family history. It's one of the only sports I watch willingly and semi-regularly, so I've learned a lot about it purely through osmosis, and you can tell that Katie Hoffman knows the ins and outs of this sport. There's a lot of cool details in here about player stats, understanding the different dynamics of the positions, really capturing the flow of the gameplay. It made my nerdy heart so happy to read, and I think the author does a great job of flexing his baseball chops without overpowering the characters and the romance. Speaking of the characters, they're so goofy and lovable. They're written with so much heart, and you can definitely feel their spirit and their earnestness just radiating off the page. I laughed out loud so many times. I was grinning from ear to ear practically the whole way through. I would absolutely describe this as a feel-good book, and one of the words that comes to mind when I think about this book is actually triumphant. If you, like me, were raised on those inspirational sports movies where these improbable teams have their one miracle season and defy all the odds, like Remember the Titans, Cool Runnings, McFarland, even Rookie of the Year, that's exactly what this book feels like, but even funnier and 100% more queer. Having this sports romance set in the minor leagues is a very intentional choice, and Katie Hoffman fully understands the ramifications of that choice. The minor leagues are this weird liminal space where baseball hopefuls and baseball has-beens coexist with each other. You have players who are recovering from injuries, who have one foot out the door on the way to retirement, and also young hopefuls who are waiting for a call-up to the majors that may never come. So to have a team existing in that space of impermanence, rallying together to try and win a championship that some people might argue doesn't even mean anything, and daring to put their everything into it anyways, perfectly sets the stage for this story. And it beautifully ties into the heart of the story, which is about being brave enough to dream the big dreams, even and especially when the world tells us that we can't have them, or that dreaming is pointless. This is where the context of Jean being a gay trans man comes into play and lends itself so beautifully to the success of the story's themes, because as trans people, the belief that the greatest thing we can aspire to is simply existing as ourselves is constantly reinforced in so many ways. And to be perfectly clear, our existence, whether visible or not, remains radical in and of itself because of all the stigma, the systemic barriers, transphobia, the anti-trans legislation that literally makes it impossible for some people to be themselves. It's because of all those barriers that our experiences often get shrunken down to the mere fact of our existence. This is something Jean has gone through himself. He's gone through the modes of transition that he's wanted to go through. He's recognized professionally and personally as himself. He's able to play the sport he loves as a man. And now that he's achieved all of those things that, keep in mind, are baseline experiences for pretty much everyone around him, he's never put thought into what he should dream next. For him, being in the minor leagues and making history as the first openly trans professional baseball player is the sum total of his wildest dreams. It's a privilege that so many other trans athletes don't get to have. And because that's where he's coming from, his mind doesn't even have the muscle mass or the capacity to imagine something greater than what he already has. As trans people, we often spend so much energy just surviving that we often forget that there's so much more to life than just barely getting by, than just being content or having things be good enough. Again, speaking as a trans person, it's scary to want things for ourselves when so much of our joy and our resilience is devalued or erased. It's scary to dream loudly and profusely and often when it feels like we're not even allowed the smallest scrap of happiness without receiving permission to experience it first. That's why The Prospects is really about being brave enough to dream not only for ourselves, but also learning how to dream for the people around us. This story gives us permission to envision our own greatness, to want, to hunger, to hope, and to do all of those things unapologetically, without qualification or explanation. The Prospects dares us to believe that we are deserving of so many incredible things that we can't even begin to imagine for ourselves yet. I'm telling you, the feeling I had when I turned the last page of this book is unmatched. I'm so excited that it comes out this year because so many people need it, and I just can't wait for y'all to read it and feel even a sliver of what I feel right now just talking about it. New auto-read author, new all-time favorite book, can't say enough good things, easy 5 stars. After that, I was invited to be a guest poster for the Queerthology Book Club, which is a book club created by my friend Chris, and every month they read and discuss QT BIPOC anthologies, poetry collections, or short story collections. I will include links to their Instagram down below. I definitely encourage you to check it out if it sounds interesting. So their December pick was an anthology called Swordstone Table, Old Legends, New Voices, edited by Swapna Krishna and Jen Northington. This is a really cool anthology where each story revisits or retells some aspect of Arthurian lore, featuring everything from gender bending to race bending to genre bending. It's split up into 3 sections, past, present, future, so you can definitely see a wide range of takes on the classic Arthurian mythos. This anthology features writers like Roshni Chokshi, Sarah McLean, Ken Liu, Anthony Rapp, Wapagishi Rice, Nisi Shaw, Silvia Moreno Garcia, and Alexander Chi, just to name a few. I'm actually not going to talk about this anthology here because I did a very fun and very thorough tier ranking of all the stories in the collection for the Queerthology newsletter as my guest post. That will be linked down below as well if you want to read a little mini review for each story. It's completely free to access, nothing is behind a paywall, and as a completely unbiased party, I just think you should check it out. There were definitely a lot of winners in this collection. I had such a fun time listening through it. I should say that I did get access to the audiobook courtesy of PRH Audio, so thank you to them for that. It's actually a full cast audiobook, so every story has its own narrator, no repeat narrators throughout the entire thing, even featuring a few favorites like Joel Leslie and Sean Taylor Corbett, so I definitely recommend it if you can access it. And because I had 5 tiers in my tier ranking, I was able to assign each ranking a star rating and sort of average them together, and doing that brought this anthology for me to a little over 3.5 stars. This next book is sort of like a novella. It's officially referred to as an epilogue, and that was Bells Are Ringing, which is the holiday epilogue for We Could Be So Good by Cat Sebastian. This is also free to access and download via Cat Sebastian's newsletter, which I will link down below. I'm not going to talk about it too much because it's just pure fluff, but I loved it so much. We Could Be So Good is Cat Sebastian's latest trad pub release. It's a queer historical romance set during the 1950s about a scrappy reporter who gets stuck mentoring the newspaper owner's rich son, and he assumes that they'll hate each other, but then they become the bestest of friends, and then eventually best friends who are very deeply in love with each other, and it's great. The only content warnings I think I noted for this are references to partner death and grief in regards to a secondary character, not the main characters, and also brief instances of sexual content. Again, not going to say too much about this. It's super short. You can really read it any time of year. The only thing that kind of makes it holiday is the inclusion of a Christmas tree towards the end, so it's not that serious, but above all else, this epilogue is just indulgently fluffy and domestic. Just like the full-length novel, this epilogue is utterly delightful. It's sweet. Nick and Andy are just a beautiful pairing. They really complement each other. It's just nice to see them taking care of each other and finding a way to build a life together, especially during a time period where they would not have been afforded that space otherwise. Cat Sebastian is also really smart about using this epilogue as a chance to reintroduce the main character of her next book. It's not a sequel per se, it's not even a companion book, but the main character is one of their fellow reporters. So this epilogue serves really nicely as a soft setup for that other book. I truly have nothing bad or even constructive to say about this. It was the perfect thing to read on Christmas Eve. I can't get enough of these characters or Cat Sebastian's phenomenal work. The rating for this isn't super important, but I gave it 5 stars. True to form, I suppose, on Christmas Day of all days, I finally finished Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. The perfect holiday read. This is the second book in the Alex Stern series, which begins with Ninth House. It's a mixture of contemporary fantasy, dark academia, murder mystery, and even some paranormal stuff. The story follows Alex, who's been invited to attend Yale University, not really as a student, but as a member of Leith House, which is one of the secret magical societies on campus in charge of overseeing the other secret societies and ensuring that they don't misuse their magic. She's been invited to be part of this society because she has the unique ability to be able to see spirits. No spoilers, but Hellbent is the continuation of that story using a lot of the same genre inputs and elements, except it's possibly about an underworld heist. And I will leave it at that. Content warnings for death, violence, and graphic injury, non-graphic references to suicide attempts, experienced sexism and misogyny, some ableist language, some depictions of bullying and sexual harassment, brief references to rape, panic attacks, and some descriptions of animal death. I'll just start by saying that in terms of the plot and aesthetic, I enjoyed this way more than Ninth House. Anything that has to do with demons, hell, the underworld, contending with the devil, anything like that, I am there 110%. It's so interesting because a lot of people who love Ninth House are often disappointed by Hellbent or claim that Hellbent is a completely different book that totally came out of left field, but I don't find that to be true in the slightest. Formulaically speaking, in terms of the plot inputs and general style, it's almost the same book. There's dark occult magic stuff going on in the forefront, along with the central question of what happened to Alex's mentor, Darlington, and some murder mystery in the background. It's literally the same story in that respect. But you know I love a ragtag group. I love a band of outcasts coming together to defy the odds and fly in the face of the impossible, especially when they're told that they can't or they shouldn't, and that's very much what this is. Another reason I think this sequel works for me is because while Alex has unique magical abilities, as a main character, she's really not that special or interesting. She's just not. And what this sequel is doing really well is pulling in those secondary characters, exploring them and complicating them, and by doing that, now there's much more at stake. Overall, besides the actual baseline plot working much better for me, I would say my general feelings about this series remain the same. I love the genre bending, I enjoy the storytelling structure, all of the different genre and aesthetic inputs are really cool. There's an undeniable dark intrigue to the story, and at the same time, the series absolutely has its problems. It's incredibly white, it's incredibly colonial, constantly referencing sacred artifacts or beliefs or traditions that have been stolen from their homelands. The few characters of color involved are absolutely tokenized and or discarded after they're no longer useful, and no one at any point ever contends with or even recognizes their privilege. The series keeps getting so close to what I need it to be. It's so close and yet so far. There is absolutely an irony to the fact that Leith House exists to keep these other magical societies in check, when the fact of the matter is that their power and privilege will always make them reckless, will always protect them on its own, will always make them fundamentally uncontrollable. And that irony is both purposeful and necessary, because without it, there wouldn't be a series. However, the series will actually have to contend with that tension at some point, and so far it hasn't been able to actually name that tension in so many words. It keeps getting dangerously close, but like with all of the problematic undertones in this series, it always seems to be written off as simply the price of doing business. And baby, that's just not good enough. Like I said, it keeps getting close. I hope my faith will eventually be rewarded, but at the same time, I'm keeping my expectations fairly tempered because I'm not even sure that Leigh Bardugo is the right author to even effectively draw those conclusions, if that makes sense. But like I said, despite its consistent flaws, I still had a pretty good time with this otherwise, and I actually gave it 4 stars. After that, I picked up my Patreon pick for the month, which was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I was once again kindly granted access to the audiobook courtesy of PRH Audio, and the audiobook is read by Samara McLaren, who does a pretty good job, by the way. This is pitched as an uplifting, cozy, witchy romance. It's about an Indian-British witch named Mika who's been forced to hide her magic her entire life. She's always been told that witches are not allowed to associate with each other because the concentration of too much magic in one place can draw too much undue attention and be very dangerous. However, she likes to indulge by posting videos online where she pretends to be a witch, banking on the fact that no one's gonna take it too seriously, until someone does, and she receives a message begging her to come to this remote and mysterious nowhere house to teach 3 unruly young witches how to control their magic. Content warnings for some descriptions of injury, recollections of parental death, grief, and child neglect, references to past experiences of racism and homophobia, brief references to sibling abuse, and some explicit sexual content. I have to be honest, I've been dreading reviewing this one a bit because I have some things to say about it that y'all are not gonna like. But they do have to be said. And I know this book is widely beloved by so many people, and if it means something personal to you, I'm happy for you, but for me, it was just a huge miss. I'm gonna start with what I enjoyed though, because I think there's a lot of thematic value to this story, and I think that's where a lot of people are resonating most with it, to the point where they might overlook some of the other aspects, but let's just start there. I do think this story has a lot of great things to say in regards to the circular and cyclical nature of marginalization. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of stigma put on marginalized communities, and in the fiction of this story, witches are marginalized to the point where, by design, we become ostracized from our own communities. And sometimes when we're so terrified of being recognized as other, we will then marginalize ourselves even further because the onus is put on us for being too different or standing out too much, instead of asking ourselves, what is the end goal of society singling us out? That's definitely the experience Mika is having in this story. She's been taught her entire life that it's too dangerous for witches to congregate together, to occupy the same space. And by restricting herself in that way, by internalizing that fear and that underlying shame, she's effectively cutting herself off from her community, which is a tremendous source of power that she can no longer access. We as humans were not meant to survive this world on our own. We need support. We need help from other people. We need care from our communities. We need collective cooperation. We need connection with other people, especially with others who have lived our experiences. All of those things are the foundational tenets of community, and when marginalized people are cut off from their communities, we lose access to those forms of power and those resources, which again is the entire point. So I think that's why the found family aspect of the story lands so strongly for a lot of people, because it beautifully ties in those themes and those ideas about discovering and formulating community against all odds, and about finding our power in other people while also empowering those around you to be better at the same time. So I want to be very clear. I'm deeply appreciative of that work the story is doing. I deeply respect and resonate with that message, and I think it's one that a lot of people can benefit from and that a lot of people take with them after reading this. All that said, I take very serious issue with anyone pitching this story as a non-problematic alternative to The House in the Cerulean Sea, because it's also problematic in its own ways, and in fact in very similar ways. I'm not going to rehash the whole TJ Klune debacle. TLDR, his inspiration for The House in the Cerulean Sea was the 60s scoop, which was an epidemic of indigenous children being stolen from their families, and he has never once contended with the fact that he co-opted that history and also indigenous people's very real colonial trauma for his own financial benefit. So a lot of people recommend this book as an alternative cozy magical romance, which I fundamentally and fervently disagree with, because no one has ever said that this book also has child kidnapping woven into it. And if you've read this book and you don't remember that, I don't blame you, because these are throwaway blink and you miss it type sentences, but part of the world building in this story is that all witches are orphans. The magical gene is passed down through the matriarchal line, and for whatever reason, all witches eventually end up as orphans. 2 of the 3 girls living in Nowhere House have been abducted from their homelands based on the logic that they were orphans, they had no living family, and allegedly they had no one else to teach them magic. So this witch named Lillian just took them back to the UK, even though she had no legal authority to do so. One of them is from Vietnam, and the other one, I cannot make this up, there will be a quote on screen, was rescued from the rubble of a bombed Palestinian hospital. And again, in both cases, it was determined that it would be in their best interest not to connect them with their own communities, but to bring them to the UK, teach them English, teach them proper magic, etc., which is a colonial mindset. This also applies to the main character herself, by the way, who was born in India and also brought to the UK without her consent or any sort of legal basis. And no matter what the intentions, no matter what the end result, no matter how quote-unquote feel-good the found family aspects of the story might be, that is textbook child abduction and kidnapping of BIPOC children from non-Western countries, which is not okay and will never be okay. I don't want to muddy the waters with this whole House in the Cerulean Sea comparison. As I told my friends while I was processing this story, I'm not interested in debating which one is worse. I'm not interested in comparing colonizer apples to colonizer oranges. All I'm saying is that the basis of what makes this found family possible is deeply colonial in nature. It's deeply uncomfortable and unacceptable, and it's never once reconciled or even acknowledged on the page. Even putting that aside, which is a lot, there's also a twist in the last quarter of the story that I did not like. It's as far from feel-good as you can possibly get on the spectrum of emotions. It colored my perception of the side characters very differently to how I felt about them before that point. And I feel like that twist fundamentally undermines any and all development that happened not only with the found family, but also with the romance. And that's not even to mention how I found the romance itself to be mediocre at best. So unfortunately, there were just too many things keeping me from loving this story, no matter how much I might have wanted to going into it. I have absolutely no interest in prescribing how people should read things, whether they should read things or can read things. Only you can make that choice. But if you're going to read this book or recommend this book, I just hope that you do so with eyes wide open. I would definitely give this author another chance in the future, but this book was just a huge miss for me. I gave it 2 stars. The next book I read is one I will quickly mention, but unfortunately I cannot review because it falls under the Stand Up SMP boycott organized by Readers for Accountability. It's published under Wednesday Books, which is part of St. Martin's Press, and that is A Far Wilder Magic by Allison Saft. Yes, I did finally do it. Again, can't say a single thing about this, which is a real shame. If you don't know what Stand Up SMP is, I will include links to the Readers for Accountability Instagram and also their resources page, which has all the background information about the boycott. I will not be platforming or reviewing any SMP books until the very clear, very actionable demands of the boycott are met, and I encourage you to do the same, especially if you don't endorse pinkwashing or Zionism, which I fervently do not. And with that, we come to the last book I finished finished for the year, which was a little queer indie novella called A Necessary Chaos by Brent Lambert. This was pitched as basically, what if This Is How You Lose the Time War was a black MM romance? Which, frankly, is a great question to ask. This is a queer sci-fi romance, as I said, where there's two major forces vying for dominance, a magical empire and a powerful group of anarchists. Our main characters are two mages from either side of this war who are assigned to spy on each other by way of a fake relationship that they both know is fake. But when they genuinely start falling for one another, what happens when the fate of the universe depends on their ability to kill their target? Content warnings for explicit sexual content, death, some graphic violence, and descriptions of bodily gore, mentions of vomit, brief reference to human trafficking, and some descriptions of drug use. I'm gonna start with some caveats because I know I just mentioned This Is How You Lose the Time War, and some of you may have blacked out after that, but I want to clarify and say that the two stories are similar in setup, but not necessarily similar in style. In This Is How You Lose the Time War, you're gonna get this beautiful, poetic romance, but in A Necessary Chaos, you're gonna get this edgier, grittier, almost desperate kind of passion, if that makes sense. Again, I was talking with my friends about this book, and they refined that comp title in really exciting ways that I wanted to share. One of them said it sounded like This Is How You Lose the Time War meets Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I haven't seen that one yet, but I do get the reference, so I think I would agree. Another friend said it sounded like This Is How You Lose the Time War mixed with big Finpo energy, but like if Finn never actually defected from the First Order, which also sounds incredibly good and correct. All that said, I really enjoyed this. It's a delightfully tropey and twisty sci-fantasy story underpinned by a dangerous, sexy romance. It's surprising, it's dynamic, it kept me guessing, and the story kept evolving the entire way through. Honestly, it wasn't really on my radar for 2023, but I'm really glad I got a chance to read it. Listen, I already said this before, but anything about demons or demonic possession is my love language, and this story has that in spades, much to my surprise. Once again, I really appreciate the thematic work this story is undertaking. A lot of it is about how the entirety of our personal worlds are made up of stories. Even the furthest limitations of our worlds are stories that we tell ourselves, and just because we deeply believe in those stories doesn't always make them true, as difficult as it may be to reckon with that sometimes. And oftentimes we get lost in this misconception that there's only a set number of ways to exist, like our entire lives can only be plotted on a horizontal axis where you're either on one end or the other. But that stifling two-dimensional kind of thinking ends up holding us back. A lot of the story is about the necessity of evolution, the ability to look into ourselves and discover something new, the bravery it takes to create an entirely new kind of meaning or context based on what already exists but not confined to it. It's a very radical kind of story in that sense, and I found it to be every bit as thematically rewarding as it was exciting to read from a plot standpoint. If this sounds at all interesting to you, I definitely recommend looking it up, and hopefully we get much more from Brent Lambert in the future. I gave this a very strong 4 stars. So those are all the books I read to close out 2023. Kind of a strange month in some ways, but still pretty strong overall, I think. If you've read any of these books and want to share your thoughts respectfully, or if you want to tell me how you ended your reading year or even started your new one, feel free to stop by the comments so we can discuss. That is everything I had to share for this final wrap-up of 2023. Stay tuned for my best books of the year video, but thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.